training as outlined in the NRS. Vice President. Thank you, Member Ellis.
To reduce the record, just one quick hope/request. I know this is slightly off topic since you're not talking about the science reading training, but since Member Ellis brought it up, one request I would have, and love that you all are looking at the coursework. I feel like what we often hear from teachers is that they're required to do all these training. I would have is become a checklist. And so on paper, they've met the requirement, and then they go back to their classroom and do the same thing they've always been doing. And so I would love if we somehow in the course evaluation look at some sort of result, some sort of competency, some sort of like better way that teachers can demonstrate mastery other than I sat through X number of hours. So I feel like it's a real opportunity to get at the intent of the law, which is to improve instruction, but I know that's hard to do legislatively. But so there might be an opportunity through the course approval to make sure that that's baked into the process. And it's not just like X number of hours on these topics, but you must actually be able to demonstrate X, Y, and Z. So just want to throw that, you may already be thinking about that, but I just want to throw that out there.
So Mandy Latham for the record. So yes, those are already considerations. We, as part of the first whole process, like quality assurance plan would have to be submitted, which again would help to verify. Additionally, part of the stakeholder group that are required to take the training are administrators, supervisors of those administrators, and anyone who helps to guide literacy policy in their district. And so that also will help to provide some of that quality assurance that it's not just the checkbox. Member Orr?
Thank you. Member Orr, can you describe how you're going to, you said you wanted to honor the work that had already been done at schools, because there are some school leadership who have really dug into this for a really long time. How will that process look?
So Mandy Latham for the record. So that is something that we're currently working on developing, and then we'll provide more information at the time that it is ready to share.
Okay, I think we are ready for the second part of this presentation. Oh. All right, as we transition, I'd like to welcome Superintendent Wakefield to say a few words.
Thank you, Superintendent Wakefield, for the record. So as we move into this next section, this was an item, an area that I had some questions about coming in my onboarding and preparation. So I wanted to just offer a flyover statement that then will help frame up the item that you're going to take. So I'm going to point out that the board has engaged in assessment selection for some time. Okay. The next presentation, which requests your approval of iReady, is adding to the existing MAP assessment for 26-27. So the presentation is about a specific assessment. It adds to one that is already in place. As you are aware, the 25-26 school year, or the 25-26 school year, districts and charters were able to offer iReady or MAP based upon a change in statute via SB 460. Okay. So your approval of the iReady contract today allows the state to actually support to fund both the MAP and iReady for the 26-27 school year. Okay. This action is consistent with what we've been hearing from local superintendents as well. So happy to answer any questions at that flyover level. The item is specific to one of the two because we have the other in place already. Okay. Thank you. And with that, I'll pass it to our great team at ND.
Good morning, Mike Pacheco of record. I'm the lead of the assessment team at the department in the Office of Assessment, Data, and Accountability Management. Thank you for the opportunity to bring back to the state board the recommendation of the RFP evaluation committee for the read by read assessment. Next slide, please. The recommendation we are bringing before the state board today was brought before the state board in April of 2025. At that meeting, the state board had concerns around the implementation timeline, around the implementation timeline. If the state board approved the recommendation, it is felt that there would be sufficient time for the implementation and training in Nevada school districts for this assessment. It's important to mention that with the state approved recommendation brought before today, there is more than sufficient time for the assessment for the 26-27 school year, providing PD to all school districts. It is also important to note, as the superintendent noted, that thanks to recent legislation in 2025, school districts may submit a request to administer an alternate B5 assessment. This process is anticipated to be for next year. In other words, should the school board approve this recommendation brought before it today, any school district may submit a request to administer another B5 assessment. Next slide, please. This recommendation was presented in April this year. And may be a repeat of information for some board members, but as there are new board members who want to share some of the RFP evaluation committees represented 7 school districts and the Nevada Association of School Superintendents. Next slide, please. Additionally, the evaluation committee included the provided stakeholder groups. Included in these groups are district assessment directors, state and district literacy leaders, classroom educators, and students. Next slide, please. Prior to its release, the department worked closely with stakeholders to finalize the RFP content and selection criteria that was used by the evaluation committee in rating submitted proposals. Next slide, please. The result of the proposal evaluation committee and the recommendation brought for approval to the state board today is curriculum associates iReady assessment administration to students in kindergarten through 3rd grade. Okay, next slide, please. Should the state board approve the recommendation brought for action today, the department will work with state purchasing to finalize the required contract documents and will begin coordinating implementation activities focused at full district-wide implementation of the assessment beginning with school year 2026-2027. Next slide, please. As always, I am here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Questions, comments from board members? Member Orr and then member Hughes.
Thank you. So iReady assessment comes most schools with also an ability for students to practice at their level after the diagnostics throughout the year. Will this contract that the state is signing include those resources? So, and
That's a great question. I think from the scope, we can verify that later today from the board. We should note that the contract per state process is executed. So the process is create an RFP, Mike presented who was involved in the RFP, who was involved in setting the criteria to review the proposals submitted by prospective vendors. And then we come to the board state law with the recommendation. What happened since the April appearance of this on board agenda item, state purchasing created a contract. That's per their province. So we have a contract. So that I can assure everyone in attendance today exists. I look forward when we get back to my office if there is a piece of school work. I believe it's there, but I don't want to go on public.
just really just for the public to understand that this would look different than MAP testing for schools, because the MAP test is again, a diagnostic assessment given 3 times per year, but does not have like a curriculum in between that for students to practice. So it does look different for schools. I just want to make sure that it's on record and documented.
Member Vice President Hughes.
Thank you, member Hughes for the record. I think I heard Superintendent Wakefield say this, but or allude to this, but just want to double check. So, because we're in a multi-assessment world now, we already have math you'd mentioned sort of going, so this would add to that. So if a district, I know that not all districts wanted to move to iReady, but a good chunk of them did. So at this point, with the approval of this, then financial support happens regardless of which options a district takes. So I have that right.
Yeah, Superintendent Wakefield, I'll
Go ahead.
Yeah, I said, Superintendent Wakefield, that's correct. This action today would enable us to meet either need and support the funding at the state level for either of those options. And I'll pass it to Peter if you'd like to add anything in addition to that.
Thank you, Superintendent Wakefield. Peter Futz for the record. I just wanted to add clarity here. What is being brought to the board today is the state's read by 3 base assessment. For lack of a better term, I'm going to use the term base. In other words, MWEA will not continue in its current role, which is the state's read by 3 assessment. Recommendation, I'm going to repeat this, up before the board today is to select the state's read by grade 3 assessment. Recent legislation has provided the opportunity for districts to request to the Department of Education an alternate read by grade 3 assessment for this school year 24 or 25, 26, excuse me. That is the iReady. Yeah, because we have the existing state's read by grade 3 assessment being the MAP growth assessment. This year, the alternate assessment, again, that districts had to formally request to administer and use is the iReady. For 26, 27, and beyond, just wanted to clarify that point. I hope that made sense. However, it doesn't change what Superintendent Wakefield has verified, that we're looking at the costs for both assessments not to exceed a certain amount. So I hope that provides some information. Thank you.
Member Else.
Yes, thank you. So what is the process that districts would need to do then? What was it to request a secondary assessment? Does that go to the Board of Ed or just to the department?
Thank you, Peter. So for the record, the department decided to streamline the process. District letterhead, request letter from the district superintendent to the superintendent of public education is what was required.
Thank you.
Hey, any other questions, comments, board members, or can I get a motion on this item?
Member Hudson, motion to approve this item.
Thank you, Member Hudson. Can I have a second? Member Dawson, second. Okay. Member Hudson, could you please be more specific in your motion that we are requesting to approve iReady? Please.
Hey, Member Hudson, I motion to approve iReady for the state assessment for the read by 3 process. Sorry.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Member Dawson, second. All right, we have a second. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, seeing none, the item passes and we will move on to agenda item 9. So turning to the next agenda item, the board will review and consider information and recommendations from the field regarding the exit age criteria for students receiving special education services under the developmental play, or you'll probably more commonly hear it referred to as DD category for special education. And as a reminder, this has been on our agenda repeatedly in the last year and a half, or so over the last 2 years, the board has heard information about this item. And we have requested specific data relative to this item to assist us with our decision making. Today's discussion will focus on a proposed revision to extend the current age to 7 years old based on a survey and feedback from educators, specialists, and different individuals from across the state. You'll note the presentation does not include information that was requested by the board that it had deemed necessary to assist with our decision making. Presenting this item is Julie Bowers, Director of the Office of Comprehensive Student Supports. And following the presentation, the board may take possible action related to the proposed revision. And please note, given my professional role and the direct impact any decision on my daily work, I will be recusing myself on the votes on this item. I will now look to Ms. Bowers, and please proceed with this item when you are ready.
Thank you. Good morning, I'm President Dockweiler and Vice President Hughes. And I am Julie Bowers. I am the Director of the Office of Comprehensive Student Services here at NDE. I have with me today Kate Guzzi, who is my Assistant Director and also our Early Childhood Coordinator, as well as Catherine Fusler, who is our Part A Data Manager, to help answer any questions you may have about the information we're going to present today. Before we dive into the presentation, I want to briefly revisit the history of the conversation, just as President Dockweiler just did, that this has been an ongoing discussion for the board since last May of 2024, and that our latest request was to bring further data to the state board to be able to make a decision about whether or not to change the age. As you can see, you saw the presentation, but before we got here today, you already know that some of the data requested is not available statewide. And so as we move into the presentation, I didn't know if you wanted to go through the entire presentation and the whole history, or if you just wanted to move forward to the slides about why the data wasn't available and possible next steps.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Please proceed with all the slides. I think it's all relevant information.
Okay. All right, next slide. So again, this is just a review of the conversation that we've had at the last meeting in September. The board voted against making any changes because they wanted more data in order to make an educated decision based on the data points that were requested. So in December of 2024, it was January, I can't remember when we had our in-person meeting with all of our directors. We had a pretty robust conversation with our districts about what data was available and what the needs were around changing the DD age, so that we could bring more information back to the state. Next slide, please. I think it is important to review that the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, permits the identification of children with developmental delays and continuity of instructional supports through age 9. So again, we can consider the change of age up through age 9 as measured by appropriate diagnostic assessments. However, currently, the Nevada State Board of Education's current developmental delay rule, NAC 388.430, limits developmental delay identifications to children under the age of 6. So that is where we started the discussion. We need to change this and open up the ability for DD to be an eligibility criteria past age 6. Next slide. In both of our previous presentations, we reviewed the national data on the trends of different states and how and what age ranges they use to identify developmental delay. And as you can see, there are some states, obviously, that do allow for DD past age 6. And that is the majority of the states nationwide. Next slide, please. After presenting the data in May of 2024, we went to our state psychologists, special education directors, speech and language professionals, and did a survey around whether or not the field felt that the change of age needed to happen. That data was presented at the September 2024 meeting, and this is a summary of that data. Based on the 223 responses we had, which again, I'll remind people that survey went out, I think, on a Thursday of Labor Day weekend, and by the Wednesday after Labor Day weekend, we had 223 responses, which is a huge response rate for this information. So overwhelmingly, the field felt that the DD age should be changed, majority to age 9, less support for age 7 to 8, but also included that obviously in changing the age, the criteria for DD would need to be reviewed, and we would need to make the necessary changes to eligibility forms. And then 3% of the people responded that they don't think the age change. The overwhelming responses for changing the age around the limitations of some students to have appropriate time to show progress and show growth, depending on when they were first found eligible under DD and whether or not they had been in school prior to age 6. Next slide. Following the meeting, we wanted to look at some more specific data. And after a conversation, we decided that this was perhaps the data that we wanted to look at. So we identified reaching out to our districts to look at how many students were identified under the developmental delay eligibility that exited special education at age 6. What were the reasons for that exits? Most moved out of state, not found eligible, parent revoked consent. What were those reasons? In the conversations with the districts, it was conveyed that this data was not consistently recorded and it would involve a review of individual files. The other data points that we wanted to look at were how many students identified under developmental delay immediately continued in special education at age 6, and what were their new classifications, as well as how many students identified under developmental delay that exited special education at age 6 became eligible again under a different category before age 10, and what was the student's age and eligibility category at that juncture. It was also requested to look at those data points from the school years 2021 through the October 2025 count. This is next slide. This was the information that we brought forward for discussion at our directors in-person meeting, as well as with our Nevada PEP, our Parent Information Center. What we found in our conversations is that the data is not, it's not that it's not necessarily available, it's that not all districts collect or track the necessary data to provide valid counts of students who exited special education immediately upon aging out in the developmental delay category at age 6. So while we could collect it from some data, from some districts would not have the comprehensive view of the state, because not all all districts can provide. Again, the reason for exit is generally not required for students before age 14. So again, we didn't have the comprehensive or valid data and the consistency across all districts to provide this information. Next slide. How many students were identified under developmental delay immediately continued into special education at age 6? And what were their new classifications? Again, it wasn't consistently available because of the district's different tracking systems and eligibility categories once they turned 6 and were reevaluated. I forgot to mention before I went into this data section that when we're talking about systems and data limitations, I want to make it perfectly clear that this is not a problem with our student information system or with Infinite Campus. This is in what we require and what how we review the data. So I just want to make it perfectly clear it's not a systematic fault of any of IC.
This is Member Ward. Can I just ask a question? Sure. So when I was reading these slides, I was confused knowing that all of this information, not for question 1, but for questions 2 and 3, is available every count day, right? And so schools and districts send all of that information to the state. They validate it. We always know the category of the student. And if that changes over the course of the year, then that student's category changes and that's changed in IC. So I guess my question would be, like, just for myself and for the public, why does the NDE have to ask the districts to get them that information if there's county information that we have to validate with the state every year? Like, why can't the NDE just pull that information?
I mean, to Catherine to respond to this question, but while the data points are collected, there are additional data points that support answering those questions that aren't required that counting requests. Okay, that makes sense. Certain elements. But Catherine, can you expand on that limitation?
So the state collects the student level count day data. We don't analyze most years to see where students are moving in eligibility habits. So we report in the positive. We don't report that students have been changed or ill or out. That makes sense. So we report number of students who are in special education and receive services at that time of count day.
Okay, so it would be impossible then to take the student IDs of all students who are IEPs and then trip them over trying to see if their code changes or their IEP code changes.
I mean, I would say that it's not impossible. I think that we have to change what we require the districts to give us and change the way that we manage, and which is sort of in the first recommendation. I think that's coming up is that we can look at how to use our data in different ways to reflect that response. But right now, because of the things that we ask them for, we're not necessarily asking them those elements on an annual basis. Yeah. My thought. So again, one of the questions was to identify how many students under the developmental delay criteria exited special education at age 6 and became eligible under a different category before age 10. Again, it's not that the information isn't available, it's that some districts have a method for tracking this data and others didn't. It didn't take into account if a student moved to districts Again, it is more of a question of the data management, not the data being available. And then what was the student's age and eligibility category at that juncture? Again, under the current data collection systems, tracking age-specific re-eligibility for this population is not systematic, reported. As Catherine said, we look at the present, we don't look at the path that got them to where they are on count day. Next slide. So, unfortunately, I guess, our data limitations were acknowledged that districts admit that they face significant systems limitations, and again, not using IC, but in the way that we manage our data to adequately track this information. But despite the lack of data, districts unanimously recommended changing the DD age at least to age 7. And this is because they know the data in their own districts. They know that they have students who reach age 6 and have not, and they feel like they haven't had enough time with that student. Maybe they came in late to the school district, maybe they transitioned into the school district for multiple reasons. There is times when they felt that it was necessary to have more time to really review where they were before they made any decisions. It was also very clear that the districts were prioritizing student need. They didn't question the fact that they would need more resources, possibly have more reasons for interventions. They were more concerned about reaching our students, especially our most vulnerable students, and making sure that they had adequate time to assess and make sure that they were putting the students forward on the best path. So I guess at this point too, we have to look at, do we want to make a decision to move or to change the age, even though we don't have that specific data that helps us make that determination of how many students this involves. I will say that informal data shared with us from the districts is that it's not a huge amount of students. However, it matters to students that matter. Next slide. So based on that, this is just sort of a summary of what I just talked about, is that some of the, again, limitations that we have with the data that we have and how we use it, and missing certain points that would help us make this decision. So I don't need to dwell on the limitations. Can go to the next slide. So basically at this point it's a lack of unified mandatory longitudinal data that tracks the student's eligibility across time that's prohibiting us from bringing this data forward. Without standardized protocols for recording previous eligibility and exit criteria for our young students, our LEAs cannot accurately assess the long-term impact of the developmental delay category on the policy changes set. However, we do have limitations. So next slide. Recommendation 1 is to fix some of those data management issues within our current system, starting in the 26-27 school year, to better collect and be able to analyze the data around our eligibility for DD. It may, again, require some resource allocation and some time, because we'll have to add some data elements and have some different mandatory collections. Again, I think the system has the ability to collect the data. We just have to make it mandatory for certain points. This would involve some training, obviously, for our districts, to implement, and it would only allow us to have a baseline in 627 a year. Okay. The other recommendation or possible option is to change the DD 8 to 7, which sort of addresses the immediate challenge of the age-6 transition, especially for those who have not attended school before age 6, but does not solve our long-term data tracking issues. So we could combine those by starting to collect the data, but give a relief of sorts to the districts by being able to have that extra year. And it would give the districts the extra time in the year of service for a year of interventions that they're looking. Next slide. Again, recommendation 3 is to change that DD age to just simply address the student need. But again, it doesn't solve the long-term tracking issues, nor does it solve the problem of perhaps needing to extend that age up even further to age 8 or 9, depending on the data that comes in from those changes within the system. So it does, again, prioritize student need, giving the districts more time. It allows the IEP teams the time to avoid making premature decisions and provides the necessary window for those students who started late. Again, it would expand the eligibility population for an extra year and could have impact on resources. Again, it doesn't solve the data problem, and again, well, not again, but it will require approval from this board to make those changes. Next slide. Recommendation 4 is to look at strengthening the DD age to age 7 or another age that the board would like to see happen. But as we've said before in multiple presentations, it requires a change to our tier 1 instruction as well as our foundational literacy for all of our students. Again, this recommendation would change the eligibility category for students to age 7 to ensure continuous support during the transition from kindergarten to 1st grade. Again, it would need the support of stronger tier 1 instruction, making sure that districts are implementing evidence-based universal tier 1 core curriculum that explicitly addresses foundational literacy and numeracy skills for all students. Again, we have a start with that SB 460 around the literacy. So you can see that there are other things happening around that could support this change. We need to continue the requirement for universal screening and progress monitoring within our districts, making sure that all of our students are assessed 3 times a year with clear, non-negotiable standards for expected progress. And then we need to strengthen our tier 2 and tier 3 instructional strategies within the districts to require districts to document the use of, again, specifically evidence-based interventions for students who fall below the benchmarks in tier 1. DD eligibility reviews must include data documenting the fidelity and effectiveness of these interventions. So basically, in addition to these, we would want to also look at strengthening our preschool programs, as well as looking at mandatory post-secondary age of 6 for education, because it is really those critical first years that are important to not only the DD eligibility, but also the subsequent eligibility categories that a student. Now, this one, I think, is the recommendation that we've seen flow through all of the presentations is that this is just a piece of the puzzle for improving outcomes for all of our students. Creating opportunities for our students who are eligible under DV and making sure that we ensure that they have the supports that they need moving forward, but also making sure that all kids have access to, again, that stronger tier 1 instruction to prevent the need for further interventions. Next slide. So with that, I'll close it out and open it to any questions for either myself, Kate, Catherine, to answer.
Thank you, Director Bowers, for coming back today and reporting on the information that you shared. Who knew when tasked with this, however many months ago, that it was going to be a nearly impossible task. So I just want to give appreciation to you and your team for working through the many pieces of the task that was made of you. So thank you. I will open it up to board members and questions and comments. I would like to share a few of my own. It makes me very hesitant to open up some policy making based on feelings versus data. So that's one part that's giving me pause. And then I think our intent was asking for the information that we did was to really get some student level data on how this decision will impact students. And in the absence of that, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around any potential changes. So I just wanted to share that. And I feel member Orr, you have your hand in the air, so I will go through and then we'll go to member Hudson.
Thank you. And thank you to the team for researching all of this and especially for reaching out to the stakeholder groups. I think that information is really important for us to consider. The people who are on the front lines having to make these decisions every day. So I really do appreciate that. As a point of clarification for the whole, would changing age to 7 mean that schools and school psychologists with students in kindergarten or first grade could determine eligibility and developmental delay, or is this only to allow for continuity of services for a student who might have been found eligible at age 4 to go through age 7?
Julie Bowers for the record, thank you for the question. It would require us to review our current regulations and our eligibility criteria and make that decision whether or not we would allow further eligibility under DV for those incoming students who may not have been in school prior to age 6.
Okay, just a comment on that is that, without a lot of data, I feel much more comfortable making a recommendation to move the age to 7 if it's for continuity of services for students coming into school. But do have some pause about adding an additional eligibility for school psychologists in the school setting. Again, I would like to have information from them on how that would impact their work. If there's different types of tests that would need to be purchased by the district, if additional training would be necessary for those folks to then, do an eligibility. And if a student becomes eligible at age 7 and has 3 years of eligibility under developmental delay, then we're moving to age 10, which is past what other states are doing. So I would love some additional information.
Member Orr, I can provide some information about that. So essentially what potentially could happen is that the caseload for your evaluated services, so providers such as school psychologists, speech and language pathologists, other individuals, you've got your special education teachers and then ed teachers who are also required to participate. If a student is found eligible at age 3, they would be required under the current law to be evaluated again before the age of exit or within 3 years, never is sooner. And so the student could potentially be evaluated at age 3 when they're found eligible, by age 6 when they are reevaluated, and then again, there's the year later at age 7. So essentially increasing what would normally be a 2 evaluation cycle to 3 evaluations. Increasing the age by 1 year could potentially increase the caseload for these individuals by 25 to 33%. So that would increase their, just numbers wise, what that would entail. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, I think that it's really important to know, and I'm not sure under which area of regulation, could it be, is there any way that people could provide for a student coming in under developmental delay to not have to be reassessed until age 7?
The 3-year reevaluation. No, that would still stand, yeah. I think it's also important to note that in addition to the evaluators of individuals, there's also the individuals who provide the services and the teachers of record. So approximately, the data that was shared, I think in May from the team, over the last couple of years, approximately 5,000 students in Nevada have been found eligible under the developmental delay category. So we're looking at an additional 150 plus or minus teachers of record, potentially infrastructure, adding classrooms, depending on if those are self-contained classrooms, resource classrooms. I think there's a domino effect, right? That goes into, if you change this, then what's also going to happen? Those are some of the other pieces for consideration.
Well, and this is Member Oregon, I just think it's really important. That was the exact reason why the question was how many students at age 6 eligible under another category? How many students already have continuity of services under a different category? Without that information, we're back at, it was 5,000 students, right? So are we, how many of them are already being served without increasing the years for this? So thank you.
Sorry, I would also add that part of the support that needs to also be added is strengthening our child find services so that we find these students earlier so that they can get the services that they need. And so that is also something that we're working on. All the districts are doing child find and doing a lot of just continuing to strengthen efforts to make sure that every child is found.
Thank you, Director Powers. That's important information. Member Hudson, I think you're next in the queue.
Yes. Thank you. Members of the record, our council. Then I do have the same kind of questions. One, I think they would love to become back again. So one is why did you guys pick I don't know if it was a district survey, but it seemed like majority of everybody wanted 9 versus 7. And so then I just wanted to know why you went to 7 instead of the 9. And then just to talk about from experience point, I understand a lot of people concerns, but being a special education teacher, before I understand, my only concern is if we hold off, if we don't do anything today or make some type of decision to help our students, and we prolong this process, means it's just going to be a longer process of making some type of education decision based on student. And I understand we need data, but at this point in time, we don't have the data, so we do need to make some type of decision today. At least I would like for that to happen, instead of holding on for another year to see if we're going to get the data. Because if we don't do anything, then it's that if again, and then a lot of districts probably wouldn't do what is required of them, and we'll be in the same predicament again for a year. And just talking about just the age requirement as a whole, just like this year, I have heard several teachers say that they have had kids that wasn't even in school until 1st grade. So either they have to hold those kids back because they never been in school, so they don't have their ABC requirements, even though they had an IEP. Those parents didn't even allow them to go to school for those 3 years or whenever they qualify
offer services. So I just think if we do not make any suggestions or something today, we're just gonna prolong us serving our students more effectively. But my question is, why did you guys use 9 versus 7 versus 9?
Julie Bowers, for the record, in the discussions with the districts, it became very evident that 7 was the minimal, or the age that would allow at least another year for interventions to happen, as well as the least amount of impact on the system, because it wasn't extending it so far out that the criteria for DD would need to be changed. And going back to member Orr's question about expanding the opportunity for the DD eligibility to be used for other students who come into the system late. So it was, you know, when we listened to what they were saying, they really felt that at least a year was necessary. When you go into changing to grades 8 or ages 8 and 9, you also get complicated with the test and the statewide assessment. And the need to determine what assessment the special education student will take. And so it just created a longer, a more breadth of changes that would be necessary in changing that age.
Okay, one more follow-up question. Member Hudson, with these changes, and we have to make some changes within the district, would the districts be prepared already if we say 7? If it would, like, from now to the end of the school year, give them enough time to prepare for the changes needed when it comes to the language and making sure things are in place to start the new school year? Or do you think this is going to be an ongoing process of training, looking at the law? Like, is it something that's going to take a long time, or would this 6 months be good enough for them just to prepare for something to start in the mid of the school year when we have kids that like these are coming up or whatever the case may be?
Julie Bowers, for the record, I think there would be a significant lead time to making sure that the regulations reflect the changes, as well as the eligibility criteria, and having stakeholders look at that criteria to make that change. Again, forms would need to change and guidance would need to be given to districts. So I think that we could simultaneously again add the data, make changes to our data management system or the way we manage our data to continue to collect new data, as well as look at the requirements that changing to age 7 would require regulation and guidance. So to answer the question more specifically, I'm not sure 6 months is enough.
Director Bowers, I have a question, similar, in line with Member Hudson, but also incorporating parts of what Member Orr had mentioned. If we did move the age to 7, could we say initial eligibility needs to occur prior to age 6? So we could not, so that a 6.5-year-old, for example, wouldn't be found eligible and turn around and have a reevaluation to exit them or requalify them, which also potentially could speak to our last agenda item in the read by grade 3 and over identification of students that Member else had mentioned. So being cognizant that we want to ensure we're not creating a pathway, solving one problem, but creating another.
Sure, to answer your question, yes, in review of the current regulation and the changes that the board would like to see, we can make recommendations, make the changes to the eligibility form to reflect those that criteria be included in that eligibility form. I think it's also important to remember that a student coming in, even though they haven't had services, still has access to our MTSS and our intervention systems and the ability to be evaluated for special education services under other eligibility categories. So it negate that a 6-year-old who didn't or wasn't eligible for a DB category wouldn't be eligible under another category.
Thank you. Member Hughes?
Thank you. So my views to the record. So many thoughts and questions. I'm gonna try to keep it limited. A lot of it's already been said. I guess the thing that I would share is, again, I understand you all did a lot of work and totally appreciate that. And I also want to recognize that, like, we're hearing from the field that they feel like there is a need for this, and so I just want to fully acknowledge that. And the thing that I'm struggling with is I do think this is an example that sets a very bad precedent for how we make decisions at the systems level. And so I know the data may not be easily accessible, but it is possible, right? Like, you could look at an individual student by student and you could figure this out as a district. And so I just don't buy that, like, we're just gonna make a decision based on like hopes and feelings without some sort of semblance of solid footing. And again, that perception of the 200 plus wanting to move it, that's like based on real kids. And so I understand that. So like the way I'm thinking about this is like, I think the way we fix the data thing is say, hey, districts, like, we're not gonna change this until you provide this data by this date. And here's the parameters you need to collect that data. If they think this is best for kids and they care about that, I think that they will figure out a way to create some better data systems. Sounds like some of them already have it. The issue is consistency. So I feel like if NDE could say, here's the consistency parameters, and we will not evaluate this or make a move on this until we have a year's worth of data, 2 years, like, we don't have to make it totally complicated, but I do think it is feasible for districts to go back and look at individual kid by kid analysis, look at meeting notes. They have the data. It's just not as easy as pulling it up in a system and doing a filter and spitting out a report. It's going to take some work. But if this is like something that they think is worth doing, then like, you got to put in the work. And then I will totally engage in this and try to do what's best for kids. I just don't, making a decision is based upon anecdotal evidence just does not feel like sound policy to me personally. Even though I understand there's like little kids behind that. So I do think there's a data solution if we sort of want to be a database kind of decision-making body.
Thank you, Vice President Hughes. Well said. I think that sounds like a very reasonable approach. We have Member Braxton and then Member Ford.
Member Braxton, for the record, and hearing the comment and seeing the work that was done to present today, I see that there's an issue. There are several issues. We'll start with this, that our inability to address this concern fully, identifying the appropriate exit age criteria is limited by structural concerns and preparedness. And as Member Hughes mentioned, there is a need for consistency with district input. I am concerned because we have names and people and families behind these numbers. And this is what we're addressing. And although there are certain systems in place to reevaluate, let's say a person who is a student who is 4 years old, reevaluate them, and if they're 5 years old, would have you reevaluate them. You know, or the interventions in place or scaffolded to support those families who introduce formal education to their students at age 5 or even 6. And if so, how can we do better? Right? This is really an issue of doing better for our students and for our educators who have to do the heavy lift on the front line to address these concerns. So there was one slide that showed federal mandate or a federal age, and that age was 9. And then there was the survey that was taken by individuals on the front line and by experts in this space wanting to see supports for our students age 9 or having the exit age criteria be 9. And so more work needs to be done, but I am for moving the needle a little bit for our families until we actually get our structures in place, our scaffolding in place, fully support. And that includes data, that includes understanding capacity, that includes whatever training is necessary for our teachers, for our educators. But I just want to be mindful of that. You know, if we can just see the family in place with their student, give them a name, and now talk to them about exit age criteria for students receiving special education services under development. And
Thank you, Member Braxton. Member Ford?
Okay, I have, this is just wild, like. I feel like I echo, I agree with what everybody is saying here. Everybody is basically saying like, this isn't good enough. That's kind of what I'm hearing, that the intent is there and that we know that NDE is doing as much work as possible, but this isn't good enough for our kids. Just looking through these slides, like if you're just looking through it in a linear way, it just really makes no sense whatsoever. First, we see, you know, that or which states are implementing the exit age being later, and those are actually the states that we compare to as doing education well. We have Vermont, we have Massachusetts, we have all these. This entire presentation tells us, oh, we have no data about whether or not we should implement, you know, these changes. Oh, but however, this slide that says we have no data also includes all of the states that we usually say are succeeding. Then we have so many conversations on this board about listening to the people on the ground. So then we have this slide that says, based on our survey results, 88% of our directors, assistant directors, school psychologists, speech and language pathologists think that we should change the age to 8-9, the exit age. Okay. However, we're giving you 4 options that say a variable of moving it to age 7 or not moving it at all. And then that comes after several slides that explain that we have no data whatsoever to inform any of the decisions, recommendations that we're about to be presented with. And so this is to me like a case of kids suffering because adults couldn't get it together, honestly. And, you know, I used to say I have 22 nieces and nephews that are either in or going into the Clark County School District. And now that's 21 because one of them was killed by a bus a month and a half ago, CCSD school bus. Of those now 21 nieces and nephews that I have, 4 of them are receiving or going to receive special ed services. 2 of them, by the time that we go through this, whatever plan recommendation this is to figure out how to get data, to bring it back to probably 4 more committees that are going to exist before we could make an actual change to gather that data, they will be aged out of it. So I'm really tired of this system failing my family members, quite frankly. And I would like to circle back to this graph. Clearly, these 2 slides that have the only data we even have in this entire presentation that says that 88% of our experts on the ground, when surveyed, want to extend the special needs services age to age 9. And the other one that says that all of the other states that we always say are doing well regarding education also have it extended to age 9. So yeah, I think that what we need to do is not push this down the road, but table this for our next meeting, table or whatever Robert's Rules of Order, Parliamentary Procedure, put on the next meeting, because there's a lot of information that's missing here and a lot of voices that could be brought to us in the meantime now that it's been brought to the public. This is just wild to me. If I was going to circle back to any board members that gave their input, I would like to hear from Member Hudson again, because basically what she was saying that like it should be age 9 is really where I already was. It's just a matter of then, you know, what Board President Dockweiler mentioned, that it's going to increase caseloads and
obviously budgets, but this is clearly just another example of adults not getting it together, and we don't have 3 to 5 years to figure this out for the kids who need these services right now and will be harmed by not getting them in the next couple of years. So thank you. Thank you, Member Ford. I see Member Hudson. Please go ahead.
Member Hudson, for the record, can I motion, I don't know if it's the right time, because we make some type of motion of saying, like, we could table it, but it's required, we need the data. Like, there's no ifs and buts about it, it's out there, so why not get it? So I don't know if putting, like, motion to table this agenda until we get the data. I don't know if I have to make a, like, by the next meeting, or how long that would be. Can somebody direct me, or can I just say I motion to table this until we get the data needed to make a sound decision?
Member Hudson, this is Member Hughes. I was having a similar thought. I think we could maybe decide on what an appropriate time frame would be. I don't know how long it would take a district, maybe Member else, you could weigh in here, like what work it would take. I was thinking coming back at the March meeting, maybe that's too late, but if it's truly is such a struggle to get this data and you do have to do a kid by kid look, that might take a minute. But I was sort of thinking something similar, saying like, we will come back at this board meeting, and we will reconsider this pending available data. And we would need the department's help of saying like what data is feasible, and naming those specific data points that like must be in place for us to consider this. And then we could, decide to put it on the agenda or not based upon whether that data came in ahead of time. So I'm sort of on the same page you and agree, Member Ford, like we don't want to keep pushing this down the road. And it is also kind of wild that we're like, don't have very little data. So that was my thought, but I don't know what others think about that.
Well, hold on. I would like to let Member Hudson finish her motion. And then if we get a second, we can have a further discussion.
If I said it right. So I motion to table this, discuss this decision until, I guess, March. And once we get the data that was outlined that is needed to make a sound decision.
Thank you. Do I have a second? I'll second that. Okay, Member Ford with a second. Any additional discussion? Member Dawson.
Thank you so much. I just want to circle back to what Dr. Wakefield said today about having a vision of what's possible. And I'm really happy for the decision of this board that it's possible for us to have this data. It's saddening that we have not been tracking it in a way that would be more helpful to students.